Okay. Hello, thank you for joining us today. The Forum for World Education is delighted to share with you a session on civic learning. Does it matter, and how do we know? And that's the question we rarely answer in education. So we are delighted to have people with us today who can answer that question for us. I'm Susan Sclafani. I'm the Vice President of the Forum for World Education. And I am delighted to first tell you a little bit about it and then introduce our moderator. The Forum for World Education is a nonprofit organization. It's based in the United States, and its mission is to transform education and in order to ensure that the skills and knowledge required for our current and future global society are preparing our young people. To do that, we bring together business leaders, educational researchers, education policy people, as well as education practitioners to talk about exactly how not only our nation, but the nations of the world are dependent upon the quality of education given to their young people if they're going to really equip them well and to ensure that they can move our world forward in a positive and peaceful way. As I mentioned, our moderator this morning is Laura Hamilton. She is the Senior Director for Education Measurement and Assessment at AIR. And this is Laura's third prestigious organization that she's been part of. She had prestigious positions as well as ETS and at RAND before joining AIR. And she's providing intellectual leadership and methodological expertise in measurement across projects and pursuits within the division, and is responsible for business development, partnerships, and strategic planning related to assessment in education, workforce, and youth development. She also leads and conducts research on assessment policy and on social, emotional, and civic learning with a focus on producing evidence-based guidance for practitioners and policymakers. And that is the part that we felt was so critical and so needed in our education systems today, is that focus on evidence-based guidance. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura to introduce our panelists. And I'm going to step back and listen to the session.
Thank you, Susan. We are all thrilled to be here today and to engage in this important conversation. So I'll give you a little bit of background on me and where I'm coming from, and talk a little bit about how we're thinking about and defining civic learning and the perspective that we're bringing. And then I'm going to turn it over to our amazing panelists who we have, who will be presenting. So as Susan mentioned, I am with the American Institutes for Research, or AIR. If you haven't heard of AIR, we're a nonprofit research and technical assistance organization, and our mission is to advance evidence in ways that will improve lives around the world. I'm joining you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the United States. We at AIR are really committed to supporting youth and adult development, thinking about that very broadly. And so our work in education and workforce development and youth, family, and community development is all relevant to this topic today that we'll talk about regarding civic learning. So as I said, I'll start us off with just a few words about our perspective, how we're thinking about civic learning, and then I'll turn it over. We would like this session to be interactive. There'll be a Q&A period, and we'll open it up to all of you to contribute to that. So please feel free to go ahead and add questions or comments to the chat. I'll monitor that and make sure we address those. So let me just start by acknowledging the terrific international audience that FWE serves. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to come together and advance our shared commitment to supporting civic learning and engagement. Our perspective today is based primarily on our experience doing work in the US, but we know that other nations are experiencing similar challenges and share many of the same goals regarding the development of civic-minded young people. In particular, I'll just point out that the framework for the UN Sustainable Development Goals includes references to education for global citizenship, sustainable development, and climate change, with an emphasis on preparing young people to make real positive change in these areas. So what do we mean by civic learning? There are several definitions and ways of categorizing the various competencies that we'd like to promote. A useful way I found to think about these competencies that's pretty widely used in the US is to think about them in terms of knowledge, skills, and dispositions. So when we talk about civic knowledge, we're referring to an understanding of government structure, government processes, and relevant concepts that are often taught in history or social studies courses. When we talk about skills, these are the abilities that enable students to participate in a democracy as responsible citizens. So these are wide-ranging, and they include skills like critical thinking, cultural competence, communication, and digital information literacy, among others. And then when we talk about dispositions, these are the attitudes that are important in a democracy, such as a sense of civic duty and concern for the welfare of others. We should also talk about the concept of civic engagement, which you can think of as the broad set of actions that people take as a result of their knowledge, skills, and dispositions. So it's an important additional set of civic-related outcomes, and especially crucial as we consider what kinds of experiences and learning opportunities we should provide our young people in schools and in their out-of-school time activities. So that's the what of civic learning. And now let me say a little bit about the why. Given all the concerns about, performance in core academic subjects such as math and literacy, why do we want schools to worry about civics? Well, here in the US, some of the trends that are pushing us in this direction include, growing political polarization, concerns about systemic inequities, and declining trust in government and other institutions. These have all led to a renewed sense of urgency around civic learning. This was all reinforced last week when the US Department of Education released results from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, showing that US students scored lower on national history and civics assessments than they have in decades. So this is just one more data source pointing to the need for dramatic improvements in civic learning. Of course, civic learning also has connections beyond just performance on tests. We know these competencies matter for success in higher education and careers and community life. And they're connected to students' social and emotional well-being and to their performance in other academic disciplines, including science, technology, engineering, and math, or the STEM disciplines. So, tackling climate change is a nice example. We can't do this without both scientific advances and a well-educated citizenry that can make informed decisions in the voting booth and in civic life more broadly. So promoting civic learning among all young people will pay off not just in individual opportunities, it's also essential for the growth and sustainability of our democratic societies around the world. So with that, I'm really excited to turn this over to our presenters. I'll let them introduce themselves in the way they like. So I think we're going to start with Debbie and Anna, and then we'll move to Sanda. As I mentioned, we're focused on the U.S. context, K-12, but we'd love to discuss, expansions of that. We're interested in hearing all of your perspectives on other countries, other age groups. And as I said, after we hear from the presenters, I'll pose a few questions for them, but we really look forward to hearing from all of you in the chat.
Well, thank you, Laura. And yes, greetings from Alexandria, Virginia. And it's wonderful to have an opportunity to speak to an international audience today. I am an executive fellow with the Institute for Citizens and Scholars based in New Jersey. And we work on helping young people become well-informed, productively engaged, and hopeful about our democracy. and have a number of programs and fellowships and other activities that we do, both with young people and with people in academia who are, teaching them. So we work with both the teachers and the ones being taught. So thanks to Laura for that introduction. And I wanted to share with you a report that we recently produced at the Institute for Citizens and Scholars, which I'll refer to as CNS. And it's called Mapping Civic Measurement. How are we assessing readiness and opportunities for an engaged citizenry? As Laura indicated, it is important for us to understand how well we are doing, and how do we know we're making progress as a constitutional democracy? Are the efforts that we are investing in helping? Are they hurting? Are they doing both? Are they doing neither? So this project was to undertake that difficult question. Now, many wonderful researchers and practitioners are already engaged on answering this question. And we wanted to see what the cumulative answers were and how we could translate all of this into action. So that was our project. Anna, my colleague who is on with me, and you'll meet in a moment, is going to drop the link for the full report in the chat. And I encourage you to download it and review it, as we'll only be able to do like a very brief overview of the content today. I also want to acknowledge my co-authors, in addition to Anna, Jay Janeski, Matt Leininger, and Raj Vinakota, all were equally in this effort with us. All right, so let's dive in. The first thing that we did is to start collecting as many measurement tools as we could find. Some of these we gathered through interviews, other through literature review. We interviewed about 70 people who were extremely valuable in helping us categorize the tools. And when I say measurement tools, I mean the kinds of products that are out there that are attempting to answer some part of the question of how are we doing as a constitutional democracy. So as we did that gathering and sorting and interviewing, we realized that there were two big initial categories that we were looking at, and these became maps for us. So the first map that we discovered was the civic readiness map. It focuses on individuals. You'll see that individuals are at the center of it. And these are all the things that people are measuring when it comes to understanding how individual people are prepared to engage. Now, we divided all of the tools into 4 quadrants. They naturally fell into 4 categories: understand, believe, participate, and connect. These are the activities that people are engaged in that we are measuring when it comes to civic readiness. Now, connect wasn't part of our initial formulation. We added that based on a lot of input, including conversations and workshops with practitioners. So started to get some structure here. Now, within each of the quadrants, we added elements based on what people are actually measuring. So that is the full map. I encourage you to download it and look at it, because there's a lot of detail in terms of how each of those 4 quadrants then breaks down into very specific things that people are measuring. So the second map is the civic readiness map. And the civic readiness map, which Anna will put up in a moment, is, civic opportunities map. Thank you, Anna. All the ways that our institutions and communities provide opportunities for people to use and refine their civic capacities. So we should emphasize this is not a list of the civic opportunities that every community should have. It's a list of all the things that people are measuring. So again, we started with the 4 quadrants, and we started to group the civic opportunities that were most aligned with each element. And again, we go from the 4 quadrants out to very specific things that people are measuring. So in some cases, the measures are trying to examine what could be a symbiotic relationship. So when you put the 2 maps together, it looks like there is a lot of interactivity between these 2 things. Some communities provide opportunities for people to learn and refine their capacities. Communities benefit from what citizens do. And of course, different opportunities might affect multiple aspects of readiness. So these are maps that are not static. They're more like wheels. From a measurement standpoint, you can spin them and see the relationship between different things. So we are trying to capture some complexity here. So I'm going to turn it over to Anna to dive a little bit into what the resources were that led to these maps.
Thanks, Debbie, and hi, everyone. I'm Anna Gallos, a program associate at Citizens and Scholars. I'm happy to be with you here today. So what we're seeing here is basically the work of collecting and identifying tools. So you'll see that by the map on the left with all the dots. And that is basically, each dot represents a tool that is measuring that part of the map. What we show on the right is just a small glimpse of the tables that appear in the report appendix, and it lists all of the individual tools and then where we've plotted them on each map. So we define tools as a discrete method for capturing and reporting qualitative or quantitative data. So things like surveys, rubrics, other qualitative forms of assessment. And we identified those and plotted them on the maps based on what we thought they were measuring. And so we reviewed a total of 70 resources, including reports and articles. And again, you can also find a list of all of the resources that we referenced at the end of the report. One thing to keep in mind is that some of the tools measure multiple parts of the map, so they appear as multiple dots. So this is all to say that the report can and should be used as a resource. You can refer to these tables for the full list of tools and where we've placed them on the map. And so while we know we didn't capture every tool that's out there, what we did find, we were able to create a pretty good map that gives us an understanding of where current tools exist and where more can be developed. So with that, I'll hand it back to Debbie to take us into our findings.
Thank you, Anna. And Anna really was the person who did the hard work of identifying those tools and helping us get them placed as little dots on the map. So on these versions, you can see that we took every single measurement tool. When you break it down, it was about 200, and we pinned it to the part of the map that it is trying to measure. So that's where the dots are. As Anna mentioned, there is a table at the back of the report. So I would repeat Anna's encouragement to go and check that out. We have made the tools available through our website. So if you are able to go and there's a particular interest you have, say you want to study a little bit more about how people connect, you will find the tools that we looked at to place the dots here and understand what elements people are measuring. Okay. So what were the key findings after we did all of this? There were some patterns that stood out. There's something very useful about putting dots on a map and seeing where they land. The first thing is, if you look at the two maps, there's many more dots on the civic readiness map on the left than there are on the right. So civic readiness is being measured much more than civic opportunities. So that is something for us to just keep in mind and present some opportunities to better understand civic opportunities. All right, key finding 2, it became clear to us, not only from the process of categorizing and pinning the tools, but from the interviews and the conversations, that there are sometimes disconnects between different sets of measurers. So just as some of our colleagues in civic learning, this is a term that comes up in the field, speak of civic deserts, where people have inadequate access to civic opportunities. We found a corollary. There are civic measurement deserts where readiness and opportunities are not being measured at all. So that is also presenting an opportunity for us to better understand our impact. Now, key finding 3, voting. If you take a look at the slice here that we've pulled out for voting, it dominates the civic learning measurement space. Many researchers and practitioners have concentrated on voter participation. That's not a surprise because, they're looking at voting for political or methodological reasons. It's easy to measure, it's easy to quantify, we can validate at scale. So while it's not a surprise to most people, people did raise that maybe there are some unintended implications and consequences coming from this. First, a focus on measuring voting might oversimplify, confuse, dilute all the other elements that go into measuring civic readiness. And there are many, as you can see. Ironically, also, this focus on voting may make it more difficult to effectively assess voting itself. Why are we saying that? The studies indicate that willingness to vote is dependent on other factors: connections to trusted people, family, friends, contingents on the networks that we have and who we're engaged with. So who are the influences on these connections and networks? If those are impacted in a positive way, would this strengthen voter education, other civic opportunities? So by broadening, could we actually better influence people's voter participation? Right? So this finding raises some interesting questions for how resources for measuring civic readiness might be allocated in the future. So our final finding, key finding 4, there are varying definitions for what good citizenship means, and all of these require examining as our world is changing. So as we became engaged with people, different people were relying on different definitions of what they even meant by citizenship, which naturally would have an impact on what they are measuring and why they're measuring it. So we also learned that no matter what theory of citizenship was behind their point of view and their work, we live in an era of massive technological, social, and political change. And this is something that everyone we talk to could agree across, regardless of the definition they hold to. First, traditional measurements of citizenship may be out of step with current civic realities. For example, we know that skills and knowledge gained outside of school are relevant for how citizens get their work done. Technology is changing quickly and creating a lot of shifts. Researchers are just beginning to understand the impact of technology. Everybody agreed there's a need for research to keep pace on the technology side. Third, a lot of dissatisfaction with the current state, no matter where they were coming from on citizenship. At the same time, no consensus on what role citizens can or should play in changing this and removing this dissatisfaction. So these facts made it a little difficult to identify commonly understood targets for measurement, let alone how to measure them. So in the report, the full report, we lay out what decisions we think need to be made as a result of these conditions. We have a call to action that we include. We've got some of the characteristics and challenges of the space that we think are important for us to recognize, such as the hyperpolarization, the viewpoints being included in the discussion, the efforts being scattered, the dissatisfaction. So there are a number of things that we think we need to account for as we move forward. And then finally, and I'll stop here, we do think it's important moving forward that we really need to refine methodologies and resources as a field, but we need to do much more than that. We need to bring together truly diverse practitioners, researchers, and funders to engage with each other, share best practices, and in an entrepreneurial way, work on some shared goals. One of the things that we found is that there are concentrations of people who are doing work that's relevant for answering the big question, how are we doing as a constitutional democracy? But their work is isolated from one another. And so let's define citizenship and civic readiness in a way that we can speak across those sectors. Let's take the next big steps in answering the civic measurement question. How do we know if we're making progress? Do we have the right tools? What's missing? What needs to be prioritized? And then let's start filling in the gaps where measurement is lacking. We saw that there were some pretty big gaps there. And let's understand the relationship between those two wheels much better, between readiness and infrastructure, and what's going on there, where the opportunities are. So those were some of our findings, and we at Citizens and Scholars are excited to work with all of you on the next phase. It is a US focused project, but we know that we have a lot to learn from the international research and audience, and that's something that we are looking forward to doing. And a shout out to Laura Hamilton, our moderator, for being somebody who provided us a tremendous amount of feedback through the process to help us do the report. So let me stop there and turn it back over to Laura.
Thanks so much, Debbie and Anna, and definitely encourage everybody to download the report. It's such a great resource, and I think that it's, has a lot of implications for how we sort of want to prioritize our research and development efforts, especially in the area of measurement going forward. So now I'm delighted to welcome Sanda to present on the great work that she's doing. I'll turn it over to you, Sanda.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I just want to say that I am really grateful to be part of this panel and really grateful for Laura's framing and for the vital work that Debbie and Anna and the Institute for Citizens and Scholars are doing to frame the field, where we are, where we're not, and where we need to be heading. I really urge you to read the full Mapping Civic Measurement report. So, when Laura kicked off, she noted the importance of civic action taken as a result of knowledge, skills, and dispositions. And then Debbie and Anna talked about civic readiness and civic opportunities. And this really lays the groundwork for what we do, which is to provide civic opportunities to scaffold civic readiness for civic action built on knowledge, skills, and dispositions. So I think my role in this panel is really to ground civic learning within the context of one organization's attempts to address and measure civic learning in an out-of-school context. So let me step back to share a little bit of who we are. So I'm Sanda Balaban, she, her pronouns, and I am the co-founder and director of Why Vote and Next Generation Politics. I have been a lifelong educator and youth developer, and after the 2016 election, pivoted to work more directly and centrally on civic education and civic learning, recognizing that we really have a crisis in democracy and a crisis in youth civic education and voter engagement. So after the 2016 election, I wanted to understand more about sort of what had happened in that election, what was happening more broadly around youth voting and sort of the undergirding of that around civic education. And at that point, the only data that was available was the data for the 2014 midterms, and learned that just 13% of 18 to 29-year-olds had voted in the 2014 midterms. We cannot sustain and strengthen, a democracy with numbers like that. It really is a call to action, and as importantly, a call to inquiry. And that really led us to, to look at this and to understand that for young people to vote, young people need to know why vote, which entails a broad array of civic skills, knowledge, dispositions, and actions. I'm going to share my screen and share just a couple slides, if I can figure out how to do this. One moment. Okay, hopefully this will help bring our programs to life a little bit, since we don't have students with us today, which we generally do. So these were beautiful slides created by my colleague, Katie Hetledge. So we were launched with a group of young people. Is this showing full screen? Tell me. Yes, are the slides showing? Great.
Yes.
Terrific. So Why Vote brings together teens across the demographic spectrum to really look at why vote. We use an issue-based approach to back map from voting from the issues that young people care about, whether that be mass incarceration or immigration reform or college affordability or economic mobility or educational equity. How do we look at what are the drivers of this and really work at the intersection of individual activism, collective action, and electoral politics, with a particular focus on this is not working, with a particular focus on electoral politics, because these get the shortest shrift within young people's lives. So we were co-founded by young people all across New York City, coming together to analyze these questions and to really, at a time when many of us were engaging in sense making, young people didn't have the opportunity to do so often within their classrooms, because the school day and the curriculum is so congested, because these issues can be so polarized. And so creating an out-of-school learning space for young people to really grapple with the critical issues of our time was just incredibly important. We are passionate about creating on-ramps, for young people to be actively involved in strengthening democracy and civil society by engaging them, in the critical, issues of our time, and really focusing on perspective taking, critical thinking, and civil discourse in order to create the generational change our country needs. And we do this through a variety of programs. We'll flip through this. So we have a Changemakers Institute during the summer and year round that brings young people together to really sort of, again, they engage in a key area of focus, and then more broadly around the skills for creating change and developing individual and collective power. We also have a democracy camp. We were sort of shocked to recognize that while there's camps for every kind of sports and every kind of arts, there hasn't been a camp for democracy, and to really sort of build the critical understanding of where our democracy is, sort of what the challenges and tensions and threats to it are, and how they can be the builders, of the 21st century multiracial democracy that we need. We also, skip this, we have a Next Generation Civic Fellowship that has a very strong cross-partisan focus around civil discourse with people with backgrounds and experiences different than one's own. Our young people also take on in-depth civic action projects. We're always about sort of developing the sort of knowledge and skills and understanding, and then sort of applying it in sort of what can they do to create change in their communities and on larger levels. We also really use media as a key vehicle for our work. We have a weekly Gen Z civics podcast, a blog, and social media creator core. We'll be sure to drop links to all of those in, because we would love for all of you to follow them. All of our programs are by Gen Z for Gen Z, which is a critical element of our work, that it be peer-led and of direct relevance to our young people. We also, we also have something called the NYC Youth Agenda. Debbie and Anna pointed out that, voting gets a lot of attention. For us, we have an at and beyond the ballot box approach. So voting is not just something that you do a couple times a year. It is active engagement in the issues and affairs of one city, state, and country, and sort of being in active dialogue with the folks who are making those decisions. So our NYC Youth Agenda engages with thousands of young people on the priorities that matter most to them, and advocating for those issues and making very specific recommendations and sub-recommendations in dialogue with our city policymakers. We're also building a digital civic youth hub to bring together all of the civic opportunities in a city as diverse and dynamic as New York City, where unfortunately too often civic experiences, as Debbie and Anna talked about, the civic opportunities are not as measured, and they're not as sort of codified and as centrally available. We want to ensure that young people have opportunities that align to their interests and that continue to build their skills and knowledge, taking them to the next level in order to ensure that they are prepared to be effective citizens, voters, taxpayers, and, creators of the city of the future. We also work with a number of other organizations through our peer-led workshops. So we're continually enabling our young people to be civic spark plugs, in their schools and communities. So I will end it there for now, as that's a little bit of an overview about who we are, and excited to continue talking about how we measure what we do, why it matters, and implications for the field as a whole.
Thanks, Sanda. I love that phrase, civic spark plugs. I'm going to remember that. I think, the work that you're doing, I'm so glad you had this opportunity to showcase it. I think that we don't often enough engage directly with the young people in thinking about how to design programs and experiences to support them. So the multiple ways in which you're highlighting their voices and is just really, really wonderful. And so I think at this point, I think we'll do a sort of a Q&A, and I'd love it if others who are participating in this seminar, it's a fairly small group, but please go ahead and add your questions or your comments, thoughts to the, I think go ahead and use the Q&A feature, and I will read from those once we see those. But let me just start us off by asking both of you if you could talk about, sort of what's something that you learned from the young people who you've interacted with that's kind of changed your thinking about how we as adults and educators and researchers can best support their development in this area.
Well, Laura, I don't mind starting, and maybe I could say a little bit more about what CNS does now that we're off the measurement topic. I loved Sanda hearing in more detail. I mean, I know what you work on, but hearing it from you today was inspiring, and I would love to meet these young people at some point. You know, when I'm in New York, it's in the city. So the Institute for Citizens and Scholars has been investing in next gen talent as well, and very quickly we've been doing that since 1945, so it's a long-standing organization, and there are three ways we do that. We're investors in the power of citizens, we're pioneers, we're looking for up-and-coming talent all the time, and we're connectors. We're trying to bring together people who are doing that work. And to do that, we're really focused on the younger audience, as you asked, Laura. We're focused on preparing 14 to 18-year-olds through fellowships and national community group partnerships and online learning opportunities. And then we're working with 18 to 24-year-olds to help enable them, once they have that background, to enable their participation and to express themselves civically. We do that through employers, policymakers, college presidents. There are a bunch of groups that we work with to do that. And then at the end of the day, we want to help accelerate all of this. And that's why we do projects like the Measurement Project. There's one project in particular that I've been with at Citizen Scholars since the beginning, since the first cohort, and it's called our Civic Spring Fellowship. This is an opportunity for teams of young people to take on a project in their community and have an impact through that. And we provide a combination of knowledge-based things to help make sure that they understand the context in which they're working. So there's a civic learning opportunity there, and then they actually take everything they've learned and put it into practice with their peers. So there's been some very cool projects through that, and boy have we learned a lot. We think of it as co-creation with this group of young people. The projects themselves are driven by the young people, but we provide mentorship because there is an opportunity to learn and get the right lay of the land and a better chance of success if we are alongside them. But if the projects are theirs. One of those projects was in Kentucky. It was called Kentucky Student Voice Team. Did we learn from them? Yes. In fact, we learned so much that we co-created a case study with them. And there are 10 learnings that came out of that just in this one case study. And I'm going to ask Anna to pop that into our chat in case people want to see the full report. But some of the 10 key learnings that came out of this included things like we need to examine the hesitation to bring youth into leadership and decision making. What is that hesitation about and what can we do about it? And they have some concrete things that they're suggesting. Leadership roles are more fluid when organizations focus less on title and more on collective decision making. And I paused on that one and I was like, wait. And then I thought about it and I was like, yes, when we work in a collective decision, collaborative way, we are actually getting better decisions. So this is another great learning that came out of this. And then they were encouraging us to challenge preconceived notions of age groups. Each generation has its sort of the stereotypes around it, and we have stereotypes about what the younger generation is like, and vice versa. So they were challenging us to take a look at that and uncover our own biases in a way about their age group. So those are just 3 of the 10 learnings. The full report is in the chat. But yeah, Laura, you can't help but learn from one another. I think we tend to think of it maybe as a one-way relationship when we're in a seat of providing programs and tools, et cetera. But it is, the best work comes when it's a two-way learning and relationship.
Sanda, did you want to add to that?
Absolutely. I just want to make sure. Can you state the question, Laura? I love Debbie's responses, and I just make sure that I nail it.
Yeah, well, and feel free to modify it, but I'm interested in what you have learned from the young people who you've been working with about how we, in the education and the research community could better support them. I mean, you're already doing a lot in that area, but have you gotten any insights from your collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, as I had shared, we were founded by and with young people, and so that is really the undergirding for all of our work. And some of what we've heard from them that I think is, if they were here, what they would want to be heard is that sometimes there is a myth of apathy of young people because of some of those low voter turnout rates that I shared, which have improved but are still quite low. And so one thing that is very clear working with them is that it's not about apathy, it's about lack of opportunity and lack of invitation. Young people are incredibly passionate and enthusiastic, for this work when they are engaged, when they are listened to, when they are given the opportunity to take action, particularly in collaboration with their peers. We know that adolescents are social creatures, that all people are, but particularly the adolescent brain, craves that. And so utilizing that is really sort of key to our approach. It's also a way of solving one of the conundrums that schools face when we were talking about overstuffed curriculum, beleaguered, teachers who also can be intimidated from, talking about social issues and current events within the classroom, really tapping into out of school learning time, which young people have in abundance. They actually spend just a small sliver of time in school. So really thinking about how to activate the opportunities and resources outside the school day and radically rethinking where learning happens, when learning happens, with whom learning happens, and sort of unleashing, the civic learning resident in so many facets of life. Civic action, we certainly should be doing more civic education in school, but many of our civic actions, throughout life happen obviously outside of a classroom, whether that is, voting, advocating for issues, engaging with elected officials, so many of these things. And so ensuring that we're providing those opportunities. The other thing that I have heard from them is that they are very passionate about sort of youth-led, peer-driven work, but that they also really enjoy intergenerational alliance and learning from elders. Like, young people have a passion for difference, and for discovery. And so they love working with young people from different socioeconomic, racial, ethnic, religious, gender and sexual identity, but also generational, differences. And so that's been really heartening. I know a couple of years ago, there was the OK Boomer, meme, and there's definitely, some of that frustration with what earlier generations haven't done. But what we've found with our young people is, again, when invited and sort of treated, with respect and as authorities of their own experiences and insights, those intergenerational alliances and sort of cross-pollinating collaborations are really, really powerful.
Laura, do you mind? Sanda, that was I completely agree, and that was beautifully said. I'm going to remember how you described that. Sanda's right. There's this power that is unleashed when we approach it this way. And I wanted to share a couple more examples of projects that the people in our fellowship did. Like, for example, one group ended up suing the state of Minnesota and winning $30 million in back pay for high school students who were ineligible for receiving unemployment while in school. Like, this is not a small outcome. This is, this is a project they conceived of themselves, and with guidance. Of course, there was guidance and mentorship and co-design, but this is their accomplishment, right? They solved a problem that they saw. They used the system, which requires some knowledge to solve a problem that they and their peers were experiencing. Another one was in rural West Virginia. They use their digital and social media skills to help local businesses promote their goods and services online. So go to the other end, and now it's like really hyper local in their community, helping businesses actually thrive and succeed, because they know if businesses thrive and succeed in their small town in West Virginia, that they will do better in West Virginia. So the whole range, right, can happen.
Yeah, thank you both. And so we're getting some action in the Q&A, which is great. So let me turn to Becca Maynard's question. So she wrote, "Thank you for an inspiring session. I would love to hear if you have some suggestions for what policymakers might be able to do to improve civic skills and engagement." And I'll start with a few thoughts, and then we'll turn it over to the other panelists. You know, I think one of the factors that has been really, and we know this from national surveys, creating a lot of, you know, stress on teachers and anxiety and uncertainty is the, you know, the growing legislative action to try to limit what students can read in school, what teachers can say in the classroom, and so forth. And so I think that, you know, providing teachers with supports to kind of navigate the political environment in the states and districts that they're in is one thing that there's a really big need for that. You know, teachers can decide how they want to engage politically themselves, but helping them kind of figure out how do I navigate this world where I have to worry maybe about using certain words or phrases or teaching certain concepts in the classroom. There really is a significant need for support there. I think you know, a second area where we've heard a lot of you know, interest from teachers is in having access to high quality instructional materials. And some of this can happen at the local level. Teachers are very creative and they're able to find things and create things on their own. But having some support from you know, state and local education leaders to vet and then provide access to high quality instructional materials, along with the professional development and other supports that are needed for that is you know, something else that I think policymakers can contribute to. And then a third area, and this is not a complete list, is, you know, we hear from teachers, and again, I think somebody's, yeah. We hear from teachers that pressure to improve performance on statewide high stakes math and English language arts assessments, and this is a US specific phenomenon, has led them to refrain from focusing on other content areas because they, you know, they're naturally worried about the higher stakes outcomes. And this is particularly a problem for elementary teachers. You know, at the high school level, you might teach only social studies, and so you're not subject to these pressures, but elementary teachers who are covering all of the subjects have to worry about this. And so I think that both, you know, looking at our accountability systems, I'm not suggesting we should add civics tests to our accountability systems, but I think we can look at those systems and think about what kinds of messages they're sending about what we value as a society. But then also helping teachers figure out how to integrate civic learning concepts into their mathematics and English language and science instruction, because there are some natural ways of connecting these things that don't require sort of thinking about this as a zero-sum game, that if I want to do more civics, I've got to do less science or less math. We can really there's some good materials and guidance out there about how to integrate these things. So those are just a few thoughts I have, and I'm interested in what Debbie and Sandra want to add to that.
We're both checking to see who's unmuting first. Right?
Oh, I was just thinking, I'm just looking at the time and wondering if we should move on to the next question. I feel like your response was very robust, Laura, but Debbie, feel free to.
Yeah, no, I don't have much to add, Laura, on the K through 12 side of things. I think I would just add, you know, more food for thought that we can tackle some of this outside of K through 12, and Sanda's program is a great example of that. There are a lot of other places where youth are. We may not need to entirely rely on the policymakers to solve all of this, and having multiple ways of addressing this, I think, is worth considering. like the workforce. There are these young adults are entering the workforce, and employers have a really good motivation and reason for wanting well-rounded citizens as part of their workforce. So other places that we can think of too is my point I wanted to add.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think, back to the topic of measurement and assessment, and Debbie, you talked quite a bit about this, but how do we create sort of a robust system of documenting, I would say for more low stakes purposes, but documenting civic learning opportunities and outcomes. And Sanda, I don't know if you want to add a little bit to that, because I think you had some ideas there as well.
Sanda, you want to go first?
Yes, sure. Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I loved the framing that Debbie and the Institute for Civic and Scholars provides. And since we are talking about civic learning, and we do know that good measurement matters, would love to talk a little bit about how do we think about the effectiveness of civic education programs, especially many read about the NAEP scores that were released, and feel a sense of agita about how young people are scoring in civics. And the NAEP doesn't get at some of the individual levels of learning, and that's part of what we're trying to do within our program. I would love to share how we identify the strategies and approaches that are most effective, in promoting civic engagement and civic skills, and really using, that assessment to help understand what our youth enter our programs knowing, not knowing, and importantly, wanting to know and be able to do. So through our civic skills assessment, I'll share a snapshot of it, of our civic skills matrix. But what we're able to do through that is to really get at the building blocks of civic skills. So we have categories including advocacy and activism, diversity, equity, inclusion, justice and belonging, goal setting and self-reflection, political and policy analysis, and speaking and listening, that are organized into rising levels of complexity, so that we can really engage in the continuous learning, not get a snapshot, every 4 years or every 1 year, but, in a continual fashion. So we have incoming participants self-assess in each of the areas, at the beginning and then at the midpoint and the end of our programs. And they also identify 5 skills that they'd like to focus on. And then this information informs our ongoing curriculum development and coaching, plus provision of subsequent support and enrichment, opportunities. Let me try again to share a snapshot of this so you can see what I am talking about. Okay, can we all see this? So young people, again, can sort of like break down, you can see the categories of competencies, some of the key skills as examples, and then they can self-assess approaching, meeting and exceeding, as well as identify those that are of the highest, levels of learning. So, this really helps us build, towards our core goals of civic identity, agency, and efficacy. They need to be sort of like self-aware and continually sort of monitoring themselves, as well as giving us that feedback. It's also about helping them develop a civic vocabulary, to be more self-aware and metacognitive of their strengths, their areas of growth, to target, within and beyond, our programs, in order to become, informed, engaged voters and citizen contributors. So we're planning to continue deepening, and developing this civic skills matrix within our programs, as well as to encourage use of it by other civic-oriented organizations that are part of this civic hub that we're building, and to really use that collective framework to support continuous growth for young people across areas. And it's really, again, about building their awareness, their skills and their competence, to give us snapshots, individually and collectively. And it then also helps us to be able to, sort of understand what the growth is. So most recently, we analyzed that 71% of youth enter our programs with limited knowledge and experience within the civic landscape, right? And that's just emblematic of what young people are and aren't getting, in our cities. Over the course of the year, the group as a whole experienced 39% growth across all areas, which translates to 93% of youth in our programs leaving more highly knowledgeable and experienced where they were once limited. And, that again just speaks to the importance of having out of school learning time programs that have the kind of time and focus. Our metrics also helped us discern that participants experience overall growth of 22%, in their knowledge, skills, and competence regarding voting and voting rights, power structures, and the importance of voting. 15% growth in their skills that help to foster effective leadership. 12.3% growth in their competence and group facilitation skills. And one of the most important areas of growth is in deepening their understanding of political issues and topics, where the group experienced a 42%, growth and increase. And importantly, half of our young people reported that they had never attended a political workshop, prior to this. So, it's incumbent upon this, if we're really trying to grow the overall health of our democracy, to really think about the inputs, as well as the opportunities to develop growth and learning.
Great, thanks, Sanda. And we're running short on time, so I want to see if we can get some quick answers to, there's 2 more questions. So let me move to Ed Dieterle asks, can you provide some real world examples of successful civic learning programs and the outcomes they have achieved in terms of both education and workforce success, as well as citizenship?
So I'm not sure if that question came in before or after I provided those examples. It may have come in just before, but the projects that I described are not, they're not dress rehearsals. They're out there in the real world. So those are the examples I would offer. Yep.
And I think Sanda also provided some, to me, this question is, what evidence do we have? Question came in before you provided examples.
There you go.
I was also going to say, somewhat self-servingly, that I think that I do think there's a need for more research on that takes a truly longitudinal look at some of these programs and is able to follow students into the workplace, into civic life. And I think that gets back to the measurement issue that you raised earlier, Debbie, that we need to know more than just did they vote, right? So. And then I
just jump in with one quick other example. So I was sharing some of those. I was trying to answer Edward's question in some of those statistics that we were sharing, but grounding it in one project that we have, the NYC Youth Agenda that I mentioned earlier, where we work with young people, thousands of young people on surveys and then codifying recommendations and bringing them to our elected officials. And so we've had participation in a policy breakfast that we do annually by deputy mayor, by our city comptroller, by various city council members, by our public advocate. And our young people created an accountable to youth report tracking progress made since last year's policy breakfast around these 5 central areas of economic mobility, food justice, housing security, leadership and civic opportunities, and mental health, and actually created visual displays of, as well as a report that I'll put in the chat, of the growth of working in partnership with young people and elected officials, and found really significant movement, or some movement on 9 out of 13 of the housing security recommendations, 4 out of 5 of the food justice recommendations, all 9 of the economic mobility recommendations, 10 out of 14 mental health recommendations. And there's definitely much more progress to be made. But when young people can really see the progress that is happening, in a very visual and visceral way, that really galvanizes them to get even more involved civically.
Great, thanks. So we've got one more question. I know we were aiming to end at 10:30 Eastern, but if maybe we have a few minutes to stick around, and I'd love to address Jennifer's question, which is, an underlying theme has been understanding other perspectives. I'm wondering how much you are embedding this into your work at both places, knowing that we are becoming more polarized. Also, how much are you pushing global citizenship? We are all locals in a global space. So that's a very appropriate question for this audience. I'd love to hear from both of you about your thoughts.
Yeah. So taking the second part first, we're not pushing through the measurement project. We're not pushing any definition of citizenship. We know that some of the people whose tools we looked at and included in our landscape view global citizenship as the right definition. We also know that there are many other definitions that people whose tools we included in the landscape are using, right? So for us, one of our next steps is to actually work on a definition of citizenship that speaks across all of those different theories, and that we can have a common language when we're discussing what are the essentials of citizenship. So I assume some of the things that are included in the definition of global citizenship would be included as the basics in any citizenship definition. So that's answering that part. On the understanding other perspectives, this is a big theme for us at CNS. We work very deliberately, consciously across the spectrum. We don't just say that, it's actually reflected in our staffing, our board, and at every level. We are including multiple perspectives. One of the things we did with this measurement report is put it in front of a lot of different people. We worked really hard to get down to dig deep into the language and what we were describing, to get to a point where people of very different perspectives could look at the report and say, there's nothing here I don't disagree with, or there's nothing here I disagree with, that we have actually dug down deep. Now that process, you get the report at the end and it's a nice finished product, but that was a lot of effort. It was worth the work, and the co-authors, I think, represent different perspectives. And so having to have that internal discussion and debate ourselves to get to something that we would all proudly put our names next to, and then send it out to people and say, please let us know what you're seeing here, and keep us honest. And getting that reaction back tells us that, at least for now, we are doing that well, but it's going to take conscious effort, and it's going to be hard work going forward to remain in that space. I really, really appreciate the question, Jennifer. And thank you for reminding us that we need to work on that.
Yeah, I really appreciate the question as well. The tagline for our weekly podcast is leading a movement of young people committed to building bridges across various divides. It's so core to our approach and ethos, because we need to live in a world together, and we need to work together towards creating an equitable, multiracial democracy together, something that unfortunately has never yet existed, but that we do think is possible and necessary. And I'll just mention that one thing that we do, so we really put a premium on creating what we call safe and courageous space, which means that you are sort of pushing yourself, beyond your comfort level. You're not, being triggered. You are like being in the space, sometimes of discomfort, in terms of hearing different perspectives and points of view. We have a set of community agreements that we continually circle back to. And they're things like stay engaged and engage actively with people you don't know and agree with. Take winning off the table. That's a really important one. A lot of our young people maybe come from the world of debate or Model UN, and really this framing of it's not about winning, it's about listening and learning together. If you don't understand something, ask questions, and again, don't perceive questions as an attack, perceive them as an opportunity, listen fully and deeply. When you are most frustrated is when you have to get most curious. That's something that our young people cite a lot, about sort of like getting curious about something. And it's a really good antidote, to getting triggered. And also recognizing that people have a range of opinions and shouldn't be classified, categorically. I think there's real opportunities. And I will say that what we found is that Gen Z is much better about this than older folks, and so there's a real opportunity to build those foundational skills for them to be depolarizers, in communities that they enter and engage with.
Great. Thank you. Well, I think we will wrap up with that. This was, I've known about both of your work, but it was so wonderful to hear about it again, and appreciated the great questions from the audience, the other participants. So I think I'll turn it back over to Susan to close us out.
Susan, I think you are
You're
muted.
muted.
It's been a very exciting session, and I really believe so strongly in what you're doing and the way in which you're documenting it so that others can learn from it. I think that throughout my career, I have found that the young people are the ones who can offer us the best solutions. Just giving them opportunities to engage and be involved and listen to, and makes an enormous difference. So this has been a wonderful session, and I know that the reports that were in the chat will be great resources for the people listening. So I thank you all for that. One other opportunity that people have for being involved on a more international level is that May 28th and 29th, we are having a conference in Hong Kong that is focusing on how we can engage young people and how we can look at international education experiences as a way to get at some of these skills and dispositions that you've been talking about. It is in Hong Kong, so it will be 12 hours later than the East Coast time, but it will all be recorded and be available on our fweforum.org site so that you can keep up with it. Interestingly, we have a group of young leaders who are very much engaged and involved with us. They're a little older than your high school people, but they have been very active participants in trying to find better ways to educate young people across the world so that we have a more inclusive world, and one that recognizes that the different perspectives brought by people from different cultures are a great richness to our society. So I would encourage people to listen in on some of them if you'd like. We start at 9 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock at night at Eastern time, but you might want to come on for one of the or two of the initial sessions. But as I said, they will all be available and taped on the FWE Forum website. So I encourage you to join us. And I thank all of you, including Anna, who did her part on the report, for joining us and providing such an excellent presentation on not only what civic learning is, but how can we measure it effectively, because that has been something that educators have worried about for a long time. So thank you again. And for all of you, we look forward to seeing you again in the fall at our next FWE webinar. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.